One can be fully immersed in Israel's decades-long denial of Palestinian rights and relentless provocations of the Palestinians. A people's right to resist belligerent occupation, with Aimé Césaire and the boomerang effect of colonization, and the inevitability of violent blowback, all while fully cognizant of the criminality of acts perpetrated by militant Palestinian groups against Israeli and foreign civilians on October 7, 2023. There will inevitably be criticism today of the inability of some to hold space for Jewish-Israeli suffering. That pain is all too real, as memorial services taking place today across Israel will attest. Unfortunately, Israel's reaction to that 7th of October attack, both in words and in actions, shrank that space for empathy in 4 key ways that are central to the subsequent counter-reactions and narratives, especially in the West. 3 were in the way Israel framed the attack. First was Israel's insistence on decontextualizing the Hamas attack, as if 7th October hadn't been preceded by 76 years of occupation and colonization. Second, it's doubling down on dehumanizing the Palestinians, a maneuver that might have worked within Israel but lost its sympathy outside of the country. Third, Israel's rapid deployment of disinformation campaigns, which even after being thoroughly debunked. But it was the 4th domain of Israel's response, not its words, but its actions, that most decentered the criminal acts of October 7th and made it necessary to confront Israel's own criminal response, and by extension, Israel's criminal actions across decades. This is not about justifications. Nothing can justify the decades-long dispossession of Palestinians by Israel, nor the Hamas-led attack of October 7th, or the genocidal actions by Israel over the past year. By late on Saturday, October 7th, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had committed to turning all places where Hamas could be hiding, having predefined that to include all of Gaza, into rubble. Netanyahu stated, "I say to the residents of Gaza, leave now because we will operate forcefully everywhere, without there being anywhere for Gazans to go." By the morning of Monday 9th of October, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant had announced a complete siege on Gaza and the cutting off of all essential supplies, including electricity, food, fuel, and water. The Israeli bombing campaign had begun, followed by a ground invasion on 27th October. It took less than a week from October 7th for Israeli President Isaac Herzog to declare that it's an entire nation out there that is responsible. This rhetoric about civilians, it's absolutely not true. By October 29th, Save the Children reported that the number of children killed in Gaza in just 3 weeks, then at 3,195, had surpassed the annual number of children killed across all the world's conflict zones in any average recent year. The number of Palestinian children killed now stands at over 16,500, with total losses estimated at nearly 42,000, not including the countless who lie under the rubble. Western leaders, led by Joe Biden, rushed to condemn the Hamas attack. They ignored decades of Israeli criminality and provided cover for the mass killing that was to follow. They directly abetted the creation of a humanitarian disaster, one that has led the International Court of Justice, ICJ, to recommend urgent provisional measures in relation to plausible violations of the Genocide Convention, and to the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor requesting arrest warrants for Israel's leaders. In so doing, Western leaders have poisoned their own domestic discourse, as well as their ability to advance any credible political or moral argument or plan in relation to the region. How much longer can this horrific war, now more regional in nature, and including the destruction of Lebanon, This plausible genocide, in the ICJ's view, go on? The urgency of the issue should be self-evident. Palestinians face an Israeli leadership transparent about its intention to eradicate them. Now, in implementation mode, most evidently in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, alongside the intimidation and silencing of Palestinian citizens of Israel. It is also very unlikely that Israeli Jewish society will emerge from this without experiencing more grief. Their future, for now and until a different path is taken, is likely to be one of largely self-inflicted uncertainty and insecurity. Israel is far from the world's only bad actor. The differentiating factor is in the meeting point of heightened criminality with unparalleled impunity. The red lines Israel has crossed with Western backing is unprecedented and will have consequences well beyond the Middle East for decades. It is clear that internal dynamics within Israeli politics will not on their own generate the changes required. We therefore need to look at the cost-benefit calculation for Israel. Such an incentive structure might look at 6 areas: the battlefield balance of forces, Israeli internal resilience and social cohesion, economic challenges, Palestinian and regional pushback, Israel's legal complications, and Israel's overall international standing. On the battlefield, Israel has recently brought its technology and intelligence advantage to the fore, notably against Hezbollah, having infiltrated the Lebanese movement's communication systems. After a year of failing to secure its total victory against Hamas, Israel has belatedly restored some of its deterrence and power projection reputation. While the axis of resistance, an Iran-backed alignment of states and armed movements spanning Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and OPTs, each with their own independent political equities, has seen its capacity degraded in different ways by Israel, it is far from incapacitated. In important respects, the balance of forces has shifted against Israel and highlighted vulnerabilities. Despite Israel's decimation of Gaza, Hamas is very much still standing, and its ability to transition to more guerrilla-style operations is likely to disadvantage Israel if the IDF pursues a long-term presence in Gaza. The various axes of resistance actors, including Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces and the Houthis, as well as the Iranian state, have deployed drone, missile, and other technology previously not deployed against Israel directly. Israel's U.S. guaranteed qualitative military edge limits impact, but that edge erodes over time and cannot prevent Israeli losses, insecurity, or socioeconomic frailties. Israeli attempts to reassert escalation dominance have not gone unchallenged by Iran. If Israel continues with a deeper ground operation in Lebanon, it is likely to face another front of attrition, which plays to its disadvantage. Israel has shown just how dependent on the U.S. it is militarily, including replenishing its weapon stocks. And in asymmetric warfare, Israel has scored a number of own goals in its deployment of force that spill from the battlefield to other arenas. Where the battlefield ends and internal resilience and social cohesion begin is a gray zone. Israeli Jewish society has remained mobilized throughout the war, supportive of Netanyahu's actions in their extremity, and Israel has avoided high levels of casualties. But as noted, wars of attrition do not serve Israel. There is increasing evidence of reservists not showing up for additional tours of duty, of exhaustion in the ranks, of a large number of seriously injured and traumatized soldiers, and of command structures coming under stress, including from soldiers who are going beyond orders given in the crimes they are committing. Despite the breadth of consensus around the war, the combination of media mobilization and censorship, and the absence of a meaningful political opposition, Israeli society was nevertheless polarized prior to 7th October and remains so today. The protest movement is centered around the question of the hostages, but also speaks to a wider sense of a social contract between government and public having been broken. The 20% of Israelis who are Palestinian citizens, themselves not a monolith, are, in many respects, in a more precarious and alienated position than ever. Another 20% or more of Israeli society, the strictly Orthodox or Haredi, refuses to enlist in the military, a long-held tradition, though particularly conspicuous during a prolonged war, another acute fault line in the country. Anecdotal evidence around brain drain, emigration, yet another wave of Israelis securing alternative passports and, where they can, even purchasing second homes adds to a not insignificant sense of unraveling. On other points, data is easier to come by. Israel's deficit is now at 8.1%, its GDP growth just 0.7%. The increase in military expenditures is only partly offset by relentless budgetary and military transfers from the U.S. Tourism has taken an obvious knock, and Israel's credit ratings have been downgraded 2 notches. The bigger worry, as recently reported by The Economist, is that Israeli banks are now experiencing capital flight, with customers asking to transfer savings to other countries or to index them to the dollar. Then there are the unknown economic impacts, such as the number of investments into Israel that have been deferred, companies relocating or finding alternative contractors. Meanwhile, there is the cost of living for Israel's middle class. Israel's economy is not on its knees, but as war continues with no end in sight, and as the prospect of Hezbollah or Iran bringing Tel Aviv and other commercial centers, where military bases are located, into the fray, the scene could look bleak, especially since Israel is hugely exposed globally. It runs anything but a resistance economy. Paradoxically, one of the few bright spots for Israel can be found in its Arab neighbors. Despite Arab public sentiment, which has made itself quite clear, the surrounding regimes have offered little in way of pushback, beyond the rhetorical. Across the Arab world, there have been civil society-driven boycotts of Western companies considered complicit in Israel's illegal actions. In Jordan, the public has been particularly on edge, with large protests in Amman. Qatar and Egypt have tried to act as mediators between Israel and Hamas, unsuccessfully, given the U.S. primus inter pares status and its undermining of diplomacy. But the bigger picture is of an unwillingness among Arab states to deploy their leverage, which is nothing new. The Abraham Accords and other normalization efforts have definitively been proven not to create a more peaceful regional environment, predictably enough, given the intention of marginalizing and delinking Palestinian rights. They have, though, proven to be robust under the most trying of circumstances, and the U.S. has continued to push an anti-Palestinian normalization agenda in trying to advance a Saudi-Israel pact, which is yet to materialize. The Palestinians themselves have demonstrated what is known in Arabic as sumud, or steadfastness. Acknowledging the multiple ways in which Palestinians have shown remarkable resilience cannot compensate for the debilitating effect of continued political division and absence of strategic leadership, which has a knock-on effect in failing to organize, challenge, and embarrass the Arab hinterland, and to put to use public popular support. The Palestinian leadership deficit remains one of Israel's strongest cards. Israel's legal complications present a much less rosy picture. International law and the rulings of the international justice system have the weakness of not being self-enforcing. Instead, they are best understood as a slow-motion earthquake, in the words of Israeli human rights lawyer Michael Sfard, forcing Israel's hand over years rather than months. Israel's legal exposure has increased exponentially over the past year, from the ICC arrest warrant request to the ongoing genocide case initiated by South Africa at the ICJ, which will take time to reach a final decision, but has already called for urgent provisional measures, predictably ignored by Israel, as well as the advisory opinion ruling by the ICJ on July 19th, initiated back in December 2022, but whose findings have undoubtedly been influenced by recent events. That ICJ ruling found the entirety of the occupation to be illegal and in violation of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, constituting a regime of discrimination, apartheid, or both, and detailed the obligations and responsibilities of third parties to be non-complicit, including in arms sales. It is a ruling which has now been codified by an overwhelming majority of UN member states in UN Resolution GA/12626. This creates an opening, for instance, for lawsuits to be pursued in jurisdictions around the world on issues around complicity, arms sales, and non-recognition of Israel's illegal occupation. Finally, what are the implications of the past year for Israel's overall international standing? The treatment of Palestinians has, in many respects, become an avatar for injustices around the world. The Palestinian cause has generated narrative shifts and a strength and intensity of worldwide protest movement rarely seen, with innumerable new recruits and unprecedented cultural cachet. The cost to the West of supporting Israel's illegal actions and racist pronouncements is stuck in an inflationary cycle. Western politics and societies themselves are divided, often in debilitating ways. At the level of state power, the vacuum has partly been filled by countries in the global South taking action in the international court system, downgrading or cutting ties and trade, and challenging Western double standards. See South Africa, Colombia, Turkey, Malaysia, and Indonesia, among others. At a civic level, cultural, academic, and consumer boycotts, declared or de facto, are growing, and even impacting the ability of Israeli football teams to compete in regular stadia. Jewish dissent is more vocal, organized, determined, and widespread than ever. Ranged against all these remains the formidable lengths to which the U.S. and some Western allies will go in enabling Israel's continued march down the path of ignominy and self-destruction. That enabling runs the gamut from military assistance to endorsing Israeli narratives, the deployment of spurious accusations of anti-Semitism, and attempts to criminalize truth-telling. But geopolitical power is shifting, given a push also by the events of the last year. 1 year from 7th October, Israel, its allies and friends would be well advised to ask a simple question: is this working for you? The future of Israeli Jews, of all Jews, must be delinked from a zero-sum project of endless war and ethno-nationalist triumphalism. Israel's push for an endgame completion of the Nakba will be devastating for Palestinians. That project, being pursued by a nuclear-armed state, is dangerous, whether it succeeds or implodes, also for Jews in Israel and worldwide. Getting Israel off this catastrophic path first requires acknowledging the terrifying reality we are dealing with. Israel's security forces continue to deliberately target Palestinian children, according to a new UN Commission report. Such attacks amount to genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes in the Gaza Strip, and war crimes in the occupied West Bank, the report found. The targeting of children is part of a deliberate strategy to destroy the future of the Palestinians in Gaza. The UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel, concluded. Israel has killed at least 21,000 Palestinian children and injured a further 44,000 since October 2023. Despite the October 2025 ceasefire, Israeli military operations have continued in Gaza, resulting in unprecedented death, injury, and trauma of Palestinian children. The evidence shows that Palestinian children have been deliberately targeted and killed by the Israeli security forces, Commission Chair Srinivasan Muralidhar said. Even after the October 2025 ceasefire, children continue to be killed and seriously injured, with continued disregard by Israel for the ceasefire and for the protection owed to Palestinian children under international law. Israel's genocide in Gaza and the uptick in settler violence in the West Bank has left children with severe physical and mental injuries, mass trauma, orphanhood, separation, disability, and repeated displacements, the report stated. Israel's destruction of Gaza's education and healthcare systems have erased childhood and will continue to affect children throughout their lives, it found. One doctor quoted in the report said, "The essence of childhood has been destroyed in Gaza." Last year, Moshe Feiglin, a far-right politician and former Likud member of the Israeli Knesset, told Israel's Channel 14, "Every child in Gaza is the enemy. We need to conquer Gaza and colonize it and not leave a single Gazan child there. There is no other victory." Israel's foreign ministry said it utterly rejects the Commission's report, calling it a libelous sham and a propaganda piece as outrageous as its previous ones, the BBC reported. As the U.S. and Iran inch towards an agreement to end U.S. President Donald Trump's illegal war, tit-for-tat strikes continued this weekend. In the third major violation of the temporary ceasefire in place since April, the U.S. struck Iranian sites, with Tehran taking aim at a U.S. base in Kuwait. While very real, these displays of strength remain pretty constrained as both sides hammer out the details of a new deal, one that would see a fresh 60-day ceasefire and concessions from both sides. Good news for the world at large, which could see the flow of oil, fertilizer, and other essential items eventually resume through the Strait of Hormuz. Bad news for Israel, though, a state allergic to peace in the region, which is why it's pulling out some old tricks to scupper it. It begs the question, is there any cost this so-called ally won't demand of the rest of us to maintain its regional free hand? Or could the price of peace be Israel itself? We know a memorandum of understanding exists that, if agreed by Tehran and Washington, would lead to a 60-day ceasefire in Donald Trump's highly illegal Iran war and potentially a permanent peace. We also know that it's now being carefully considered by the two countries, and we know that, for Israel, peace is a threat. It can come as no surprise to anyone that, within hours of being shown a draft of the proposal, Israel's prime minister was bragging from an illegal settlement about ordering his military to take 70% of Gaza, a good 20% more than the temporary control assigned by the Gaza ceasefire. No surprise, either, that in the days that followed, Israel's army began further invading Lebanon. Once again, well beyond the so-called yellow line agreed with the Lebanese government in a ceasefire all but imposed on Israel just weeks ago. As of Sunday night, Israel occupied almost 1/5 of Lebanon, more than it has in a quarter of a century. While hundreds of villages were forcibly evacuated by the Israeli military in March and April, dozens more are now subject to further evacuation orders. And the capture of Lebanon's strategic and highly symbolic Beaufort Castle this weekend will both heighten Hezbollah's response to the incursion, while weakening the ability of the Lebanese government to maintain power as popular support for the militia group grows. Israel's withdrawal from southern Lebanon is said to be a key Iranian demand in the peace plan. Since that plan doesn't involve Israel directly, it's essentially a clause demanding the U.S. check its ally in exchange for a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. And while Trump battles domestically to justify his Doolally war to his base, the U.S. military is sneaking around under cover of transponder darkness, guiding barely a handful of oil-laden ships away from Iranian missiles and to the wider world. It's a pretty humiliating moment for the U.S., a superpower reportedly talked into the war by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and now bearing the economic and political costs of Israel's allyship in entirely new ways. European countries, including our own, have also, with a few exceptions, maintained their allyships with Israel at similar costs. France and Germany have condemned Israel's renewed invasion of Lebanon this morning, with our own Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper weekly calling for the April ceasefire to be respected. If only ships flowed through Hormuz as smoothly as sweet nothings from our politicians' mouths. And the willingness of Israel's allies to be so comprehensively cucked would be coma-inducingly cringe if it weren't also so tragic. In the UK, we've seen the Labour government's unwavering alliance to Israel distort some of our most basic liberal values. Thousands of peaceful protesters have been arrested for mere speech after Palestine action was prescribed under counter-terror law for smashing weapons believed to be intended for a genocide. There has now been an unprecedented trial in which a jury convicted 4 young people for criminal damage, while the court actively prevented it from knowing that terrorist sentencing could be on the cards. Meanwhile, Home Secretary Shabana Mahmoud has today banned 2 vocal Israel critics, Hassan Piker and Cenk Uygur, from entering the country ahead of a festival appearance later this week. The economic distortion comes next. Oil prices have soared because of this misguided and meaningless war on Iran. Optimism over a new peace deal has seen economists temper their assessments of a larger economic hit, but that may soon wane if the movement of essential energy doesn't quickly increase. Likewise, the rise in the cost of fertilizer to farmers will mean price increases in supermarkets, which have already spiraled out of control. And all of that will equate to wider political instability in the UK, across Europe, and around the world. Donald Trump has long coveted a Nobel Peace Prize. He's unlikely to get one, though stranger things have happened. But perhaps there's a Nobel Peace Prize within reach. The cost? Cutting Israel loose. I just don't understand why humanity is not angry enough to stop this pain in Palestine. Do anyone out there really understand this silence? I mean, really understand beyond politics and money. When are we going to be angry enough, hurt enough, human enough, to put an end to this evil? For now, thanks for watching and see you in the next video.